and I will give you the Zoom floor, Pauline, and mute and invite you to share your screen and to present. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julian, and thank you also for giving me this opportunity to present the work, because it's always good once you've done research to share it with people and maybe inspire others to do some similar research or use similar methodologies. So I'm just going to share my screen and get up my PowerPoint. One second. Okay. So,
sorry, Pauline, it was there, then it went away again.
oh,
So
really?
we did
Oh,
see
okay.
it.
I'm going to stop share then, and let's try again. So share, and let's try this maybe. Okay, there you can see
That's
the
it.
single
Perfect.
slide,
Thank you.
right? Okay, so this I'm going to talk for about 15-20 minutes to inform you all about the project. This is Menopause UK, and to talk about the process and the methods used. And then there'll be time for some questions. And then I have a 15-minute film which was recorded, which encapsulates the whole of the project and all of the findings and research within it. And then there'll be time for questions afterwards. So there's going to be lots of time for questions. So in 2024, perimenopausal and menopausal women are not receiving adequate health care within the UK. The menopause has a broad range of debilitating symptoms, including depression and anxiety. The UK Office for National Statistics stated in 2023 that women aged 50 to 54 have the highest suicide rate of any age group of women. There is no further evidence to state the causes of these suicides, but there are families that believe that the menopause has been the cause of their mother's, daughter's, sister's suicide. Menopause will be experienced by all women. Some may have mild symptoms, some may have difficult symptoms that can be managed. Everybody's experience is different. So those of you here listening today who are born female will at some point in your life experience a menopause. And those of you not born female will at some time in your life know someone who is experiencing the menopause. This research is hinged on being participatory. It began with portraits and collecting stories and evolved into peri and menopausal women coming together to make a quilt, which was documented in a 15-minute film that captured their conversations and evidenced the research. So motivation for the research came from my own experience talking to other women and from reading stories on a Facebook group, the Menopause Support Network, that has over 35,000 members. I was particularly interested in women's experience of care because it was so inconsistent in terms of the advice given by GPs, prescriptions, and the level of care. So here are some comments from the group in response to a question about care and women seeking private care because the NHS provision is not adequate. So Samantha said that she felt cheated, furious, sexually discriminated. Laura said, thoroughly depressing that my first thought is not to bother with my GP as I won't get anywhere and I'm better off paying. It definitely should not be or feel like this. And this one's quite poignant. From Lisa, she said, I've personally had no option to find a private GP as my NHS GP has failed me spectacularly. It's not right at all, and I am especially aggrieved as I work for the NHS. It is also massively concerns me my fellow women being let down. The last 2 years have been hell on earth for me, and I'm still not sorted after spending a lot of money I don't have. It's like no one cares how bad we feel. This text here was printed onto the quilt, so you may be thinking, why is there a tea stain on the text? It was because it was part of the design of the quilt. It's a metaphor for not caring, you know, that you might have some paperwork that you deem not to be important and you would put your cup of tea on it, you know, without thinking. So this was kind of the use of visual language to express this. So research investigating the perceptions of healthcare provision throughout the menopause in the UK has backed what the woman was saying. So one of the quotes from this particular research, which was the perceptions of healthcare provision, a mixed method study, was that healthcare professionals were frequently described as dismissive or negative, with medical gaslighting, where women felt their symptoms were being invalidated or made to feel like they were imagining them. Also being mentioned, some women reported that their menopausal symptoms were disregarded because they were considered too young or it was a natural part of aging. Eleanor Cleghorn will argue that women have not had their pain taken seriously throughout history. It is true that the medicine has historically been formulated for the male physiology, with tests and trials of medicine being primarily done on men because of the belief that varying levels of hormones in women still will skew results. As women and men are different at a cellular level, this means that even the simplest of things like the doses of drugs given to a man could be detrimental for a woman. Historically, women's pain has been saddled with terms such as hysteria, an outdated term that is no longer in use. However, in this book, Eleanor Cleghorn evidences its legacy that still prevails in late diagnosis, misdiagnosis, and women being left to deal with their pain for longer than they should, and the false premise that women's physical pain is an overall expression of emotional pain. This quote from the book motivated the participatory research aspect of the research. So the quote was, "Real change happened when women listened to other women, created their own knowledge, and bravely put their heads above the parapet." So to give this quote context, Cleghorn was referring to feminists such as the 19th century Charlotte Perkins Gilmore, who with other women campaigned against gender discrimination in medicine. So this quote was part of the motivation to pursue this research and to pursue it from a participatory perspective, with women coming together to share their experiences in order to advocate for a better care. As I was in the midst of menopause myself, having been misprescribed antidepressants and eventually given HRT, I wrote down my own story and created a self-portrait. This enabled me to decide on how I would propose to photograph the woman. It also meant as a researcher, I was coming from the position of being an insider, which carries both positive and negative attributes. The positive being that I would be seen as a member of the group, someone with empathy and understanding who shared similar experiences and was non-threatening. But it could be argued that the negatives of being an insider researcher is that they come from preconditioned beliefs, which can act as biases within the research. So I was mindful of this, especially within the workshops, when negotiating conversations with women who had their own and sometimes different beliefs and values in relation to the menopause. For example, for me, HRT, hormone replacement therapy, was the best way to treat my menopausal symptoms, but others felt that using supplements such as vitamins was more suited to them. So I was mindful not to undermine any of the women's beliefs, but to just listen and record them. I am not a menopause specialist. I was able to give them a leaflet produced by the Menopause Support Network that talked through symptoms and different approaches to treating them. I never saw myself as an expert in menopause. Being surrounded by plenty of friends who were menopausal, I could have photographed an army of peri and menopausal women. However, the aim was to attempt to find 20 women who came from diverse backgrounds with a variety of experiences. I was able to find most participants through word of mouth, and others came from adverts I had posted on Instagram. The plan was to keep a consistent aesthetic throughout the series. Everyone was to be photographed in their home, and I made suggestions as to different rooms that we might take the picture in. There are some practical elements that decided this. Each of the portraits contained an item or something symbolic that connected to the woman's story, which made sense and relayed further meaning to the viewer when seen and read side by side. I spent 2 to 3 hours photographing and talking to each of the women. There was time to take photographs and then review them with them together. The women were very much part of the discussion as to how they would be portrayed in the photograph. Spending the time to look at the photographs together, reflect on them, and then take more meant that we were collaborating on making of the image. After the sessions, we looked through all the photographs together and spoke about which ones worked the best. I was very mindful that the final photograph was one that they were happy with. I wanted to include some artists who had produced work about the menopause, as I hoped that I could call upon them to contribute to the development of the research. In the written stories, some of the women shared their experience of care, but most focused on how menopause had presented itself in their life, how it had affected their lives, and how they were navigating the journey. This was all valuable information that highlighted the need for further development to find out more about individual experiences, specifically relating to care, and to find a way to do this collectively with a group of women using creative processes to elicit conversations. So the research question was, can the creative process of producing a quilt in collaboration with others enable the women participating to collectively and individually articulate their experiences, foster a sense of community, and enable the women to have agency in advocating strategies to improve their experience of the menopause? So this was participatory research, and it was funded by UKRI Research England. So there is a rich history of women coming together to sew, mend, and make quilts. In America, they were called quilting bees, where large groups of women would gather to work on one quilt to share stories, solve problems, and teach the younger women their craft. Suffrage speeches were made at quilting bees, notably Susan Anthony, who was pivotal to the women's rights activism in America, made her first speech on suffrage at a quilting bee. When I thought about women participating in research together to advocate for better care in menopause, I visualised them sitting together making a quilt, sharing their stories. As one woman was later to say within the quilting workshops, women are strong when they come together to support one another. The artists that I had photographed generously contributed their work to the quilt. This would help to inspire the women in the workshops. Sarah Gregory gave permission for her self-portraits to be printed on the quilt. They illustrated her experience of menopause over a period of 7 years. Tracy Thompson had been photographing how the older woman is perceived in today's world. She wanted to show the positives of latter years while discovering that the menopause has quite an impact. So Tracy gave permission for her photos to be printed on the quilt, as well as some of the experiences that the woman has shared with her. So bringing other artists from different disciplines into research meant that the audience would be broadened. 55 women in total participated through the portraits and workshops. This included women who engaged as remote participants. These women were sent a package of materials and a stamped addressed envelope to return their square. The workshop participants and remote participants were all invited to a Facebook page where the work was shared as it progressed. It was important to keep all of the participants informed with the progress that was being made within the workshops, which in turn helped to motivate them to make their own contribution to the knowledge that we were collating on the quilt. Together, the women that I had photographed and those that Tracy had photographed were printed on the central panel of the quilt, which you can see here, along with their stories. These stories were used in the initial workshops as a catalyst for conversations. The initial workshops were based around the creativity with fluid conversations and shared experiences. Later, the focus moved towards experiences of care and ideas about what strategies could be put in place to improve these experiences, essentially finding out what menopausal women needed to improve. This was based on our collective experiences and what these improvements in care might look like. The women said that they felt it was easier to share personal issues that they had faced while keeping their hands busy. There was comfort to be found in sharing stories, and they learnt that despite there being some similarities in their symptoms and the care that they had received, there was also a lot of differences in symptoms and disparity in care. We were sharing our collective knowledge through lived experience to not only advocate for ourselves, but to advocate for others through making the quilt. Some of the methods used to make the quilt involved digital printing, so digitally printing photographs onto the material, painting backgrounds that were again digitally printed and then hand stitched into afterwards. Some of the stories that we shared and read were created using AI text to image generation. We made sure to title them as being AI generated. The AI generated images were able to illustrate important scenarios that had been evidenced in the lived experience of the participants. These two illustrations were not the experience of just one or two people, but many, many women who were confused about how to treat their menopausal symptoms. And once they had found a way, they were often unable to get their HRT because of the shortages in supplies. So I'm a printmaker as well as a photographer. So I was able to use these skills to print the protest statements such as this one. So whilst testosterone is considered the male hormone and estrogen the female hormone, both these hormones are present in both sexes. Women's testosterone depletes over time to such low levels that it has a detrimental effect on their health and well-being. Testosterone is not currently licensed by the FDA to be prescribed to women as part of HRT hormone replacement therapy in the UK. This is despite the National Institute for Health and Care and Excellence stating that it can be beneficial for women experiencing a low libido due to menopause. Testosterone has such positive effects on a menopausal woman's health that some GPs will prescribe it. This means that women are given products designed for men that they then have to measure out small quantities of. There is no quality in the prescribing of testosterone. Most GPs won't prescribe it. Women feeling well then comes down to the luck of whether you have a forward-thinking GP who is up to date on research. These GPs are unfortunately few and far between. Many women resort to spending their savings on going private to get the extra care they need. Some women spoke about depression, anxiety, and suicide ideation. Diane Dansbrink, the founder of the Menopause Support Network, wrote about her own experience in her book, Making Menopause Matter. She recalled driving down a dual carriageway with a thought that she just wanted to drive her car off the road. This was illustrated in the square on the left. Each and every square is personal, beautiful, and poignant. Conveying a unifying story of how menopausal women are not okay, are often battling through symptoms that are dismissed as being natural, something all women go through and come out the other side eventually. These women and many others aren't going to put up with their health being sidelined. Within the fabric of the quilt, we have demanded that more is done to improve care for women experiencing menopause. Integral to the participatory research was our collective reflection on all of the experiences that had been shared and read. These reflections led to strategies that the woman could action to advocate for better menopause care for themselves and for others. And key strategies were printed onto the quilt as seen here. With research, it's essential to evaluate its development and impact and find a way of capturing this. Throughout the workshops, we recorded conversations, and at the end, the participants shared their thoughts on the impact that the research had had on them personally. So here are a few comments that you should read through. I think these comments evidence how good the creative process was in enabling the people in the workshops to speak about their experiences openly. So the quilt set squares were sent to a long arm quilter once they'd all been put together to be finished and made into a quilt. So this photo shows some of the women seeing the completed quilt for the first time. So making the portraits, collecting the stories and completing the quilt has only been the start of this research. Now it is important to make sure the stories of the participants are seen and heard. The photographs and quilt have already been to the Festival of Quilts at the NEC in Birmingham, This is the biggest quilt festival in Europe with a footfall of 22,000 people. And as it happens, most of these people are women who attend this festival. So again, it was important to collect impact statements from people who are looking at the quilt. So within a comments book, we were able to collect how well this research was impacting on the people who are viewing it. So if you have a quick read through these, the first comment reiterates why the quilt was a choice medium to capture this research. And the second demonstrates that the quilt can inform those that won't directly experience menopause themselves, but will be affected by people in their lives who are experiencing it. And then the third statement illustrates the connection that women felt to one another, and from looking at the research and being part of it. And then the final comment realizes the need for more research and education within the medical profession. And I was at the NEC festival for 2 of the 4 days it was on, and the people who came and stopped to look at the quilt really engaged with the stories. So the written stories that were with the photographs, and it kind of revealed that the whole of the research worked best as seen together. I mean, the quilt on its own, is impactful and it has a lot of information. But when you see more closely the faces of the people in the portraits, and then their written stories, which you can apply to each of the individuals and see similarities maybe in yourselves, I think that had more impact. Unfortunately, at the NEC, we weren't able to show the video. And again, I think to be able to show this research through a lot of different mediums, the photographs, the stories, the quilt making and the video all together means that it can reach different audiences. Different people are going to be able to interact with these mediums in different ways. Some will speak to them more. So the quilt has captured the imagination of people working in health, which is a step towards taking the research embodied within it to the people who are in a position to make change happen. Qualitative research that takes place in medicine is often formed from questionnaires, interviews, focus groups, and case studies. The methodologies used to create This is Menopause UK have demonstrated how participatory research centered around a collaborative, creative process can be beneficial to those taking part and can illustrate qualitative data to a broad audience, engaging those who are perhaps not moved by graphs and statistics. So that's the end of the presentation. You're welcome to ask questions, and then I've got a 15-minute video that I can show you, and there'll be time to ask questions afterwards.
Thank you very much, Pauline. So yeah, if you want to show the video now, and then if people would like to drop their questions or comments into the chat,
Okay.
they can do that, or we can invite verbal questions after the film. Either is
Okay,
fine.
sure. Okay, so I'll share again and I'll get that started.
Thank you. Just to say, I've also dropped the link to the project into the Zoom chat as well. So if people would like to look into more detail of the project, they've got the link there also.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, Paul. I'm just going to pause because we're not really hearing the sound. We've got it's a bit of a kind of staccato video. It's like we can
Right,
see it, but
okay.
not in the sound. You just to give you the chance to.
I think that because of that, it's best then if you watch this video on my website, because if you go to my website, you can watch the whole video. It's because it's playing through Zoom, unfortunately. I think that we're going to just get that effect where you're not going to hear all the conversations. The conversations are so important. So,
Yeah,
should we go to questions then?
yeah, no worries. And just to flag again, if you scroll up on the Zoom chat, you'll see the link to the project website. You can click on there and you can get to the video, so you can watch that in your own time, no problem at all. Um, Okay, so we don't have any questions or comments in the Zoom chat. So can I just invite people to either appear, raise their Zoom hands, or type with any questions or comments, please?
Yeah, if you want to know about how we organise the workshops, how we got people on board, um, what we plan to do with the research now. Well, I can tell you about the further plans. So the further plans for the research are that Research England have more funding, which they are able to fund us to do public engagement. So we will be taking the research to local groups, so small groups to talk about what we've done and to engage them further with it. And to engage them further with it, it's going to be exhibited at University Hospitals Dorset have got a new build. So it'll be exhibited for 3 months from September to November. And during that time, we'll also run workshops where people who visited the exhibition will be able to respond to it with a creative process. And we've decided that what we'll do is we'll enable them to paint onto backdrops words that they feel in response to having looked at the exhibition. So it will almost be like protest statements, and those backdrops will be used as photographic backdrops for portraits. So then they can sit in front of the backdrops and have their portraits taken, and those will be disseminated over social media. So really to kind of push that information out and also making people aware of the exhibition as it's being shown. We're also in talks with the Vagina Museum in London, because they are looking to put on an exhibition about menopause. So we'll be running those same workshops, engagement workshops in London, and then we're also looking to possibly doing something in Bristol as well. So right now, once you've created your research, you have to disseminate it. So doing talks like this is really useful to raise awareness of the research, but also getting out to the public, and specifically with this research, also getting it out to healthcare professionals so that they can see what the lived experiences and the experiences of other people are.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask you one. I'll wait till later if there's time. But there's one from Wesley which says, "How did you determine the set of questions to the participants, and how did you recruit the participants?"
Okay. So I recruited the participants through word of mouth and through adverts on Instagram. I started with somebody I knew, and then they knew somebody else. I told them the kind of things I was looking for. So I was looking for people who had experienced early menopause, for example, because some of the experiences are more rare than others, and I wanted to depict as much a variety and diversity of experience as possible. And so another thing I did as well is on Instagram, I put Instagram ads out. And I did find 2 or 3 participants through doing that as well. And then from that, it really is word of mouth is, I think, probably the best way that for this project, the information got out there. Some of the people who were in the portraits came to workshops, and then there were other people who had heard about the project, who came to the workshops. So yeah, I think for this project, word of mouth was really useful, but it's not always the way to go, depending on who your target audience is, who you're trying to get involved. For
Thank you.
example, oh, sorry, I
Sorry.
was going to continue. For example, since having done this work, I've been invited to do some work with a nutritionist who specializes in nutrition for people in recovery from addiction. And so the way we'll recruit people is through charities. So specifically charities there's one called We Are With You, who help people and are already in touch with people who are in recovery from alcohol addiction. So, I mean, that's quite a sort of sensitive subject. So rather than, Instagram ads wouldn't really work for that, really. So going through people who are already connected with a charity who's helping them is the way we will go with that.
Thank you. I was going to ask you about the way that you collaborated with the participants to choose the images. I think you said that there was a kind of conversation with participants about which images would.
Okay, yeah.
Could you just give us a little bit more insight into how that process worked, please?
So with the portraits, when you're photographing people, people want to look good and feel good in their images. There's an image that represents them, and these images were also going to be printed on the quilt, and they'd already signed consent forms that the images would be in exhibitions. By the way, with those consent forms, anybody could withdraw their consent at any time. I was well aware that somebody might have their image printed on the quilt. If they wanted to withdraw their consent, that was absolutely fine. We would be able to cover that image or take an image out of an exhibition. So the process was that rather than it being a 10-minute photo shoot where I, as a photographer, used my skills to photograph them in their best light, I spent a lot of time with them. I spent 2 to 3 hours at their house. We would take photographs in one room, and then sit down and look at them, talk about them, discuss whether, the person in the photos liked them. I would tell them which ones I thought worked well. So it was a long process to make sure that they were really happy with the image that was being used, and it was chosen by them and by myself.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments, please?
I've really enjoyed listening to your project. Thank you. I was shared the invitation by Pete Bennett over at University of Wolverhampton. My name's Colette. I'm an FE lecturer in Sandwell College, and I did some research about the menopause experience as a teacher in FE a couple of years ago. And what's come from that is we now have a policy in the college, but we also we have a little group of women. We're called What the Flush. I think it's one of the best names for a menopause group ever. And I would love for our group and for the women here within our college to hear about your research. And I loved seeing those images. I thought they were really positive. So, I'm not from an arts background at all, but some of what you're saying, but also the way that you've portrayed women in those images, it's just so positive, and we don't see that very often, I don't think, when we talk about menopause, and usually it's older women, but obviously it's not always older women that are experiencing menopause, but it's seen in a more negative way. Not that I want to dismiss the challenges of menopause, but I think it's also a really important message to see the positives that, we come out the other side. And it's really positive. Many of the women I talked quite positively about the difference it made to them afterwards. So it'd be lovely for them to see the work that you've done, especially for them to express themselves in the way that you've done, which is wonderful. So I would love if you were able to do something with us.
Yeah, Colette, definitely. I mean, we're applying for funding now for sort of public engagement and talks. So absolutely, if you want to drop me an email, then we can discuss that. But yeah, you're right. There is, I mean, there is some positivity in the photographs. I wanted them to look strong, but actually, when it came to the discussions in the workshops, sometimes it seemed that the women found it hard to talk about the negative things. It took a while because, I think as women, we're told that we need to just suck it up and get on with it. That's kind of historically what the knowledge that's been passed on to us, that is natural and just get on with it. But actually there is help that you can get, as you know, Colette, and unfortunately though there's a lot of disparity in the care. It's not equal and not everybody, all the GPs are knowledgeable, and I really wanted to make sure that we got that on the quilt, that we didn't brush over it, and that we made sure that some of the heavy stuff was talked about as well. And doing that on the
Makes
quilt
it
was easier.
accessible. You've made it really accessible, I felt, and what you're saying is all that, because there isn't enough work and research done around it, it feeds the shame. So lots of women talked about the shame that they experience around menopause, and actually, and that's why your quote resonated with me as well, from Eleanor Cleghorn, and that's what we're doing, it's what you're doing, it's what I've been doing, and all those other women that we're bringing it into the light, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Bringing it out of the secrecy.
Yeah.
And it does take bravery. I found, my own journey was really difficult with doing that. I love the quilt, and it's out there and it's in your face, isn't it? And we're bringing it out, coming away from that shame.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Colette. There's lots of people who are doing things to raise awareness now, and it's just keeping that ball rolling, isn't it? Just keep it going, and there's change already in the workplace, and then that you having a policy within your FE college is fantastic. Brilliant.
Yes, thank you. Well done.
You too.
Thank you, Colette. There's a question from Chiara. Hope that's the right pronunciation, which says, wondering your thoughts about menopause in academia and the awareness and support within the academic institution.
Oh, okay. Well, we have within our institution, we have policies in place. I mean, it is it's not it's exactly a protected characteristic, but there are laws in place now that came into place in January this year, where the workplace has to have considerations for women going through menopause. And I find that within academia and with academic environments, all those things like disability awareness, all differences and things that need to be catered for are catered for really well. That's my personal experience, and I hope that that is for everyone else. And if it's not, then it should be, because it's written in law now that menopause has to be considered within the workplace, and reasonable adjustments have to be made for it.
Thank you. A follow-up question from Wessie, which is, how about the set of questions to the participants? How did they come about?
Right. So the set of questions. So to begin with, it was one of the probably most difficult things about asking what questions were going to be pertinent, because it's participatory research. It's very organic in that it evolves while you're doing it, the process. So, my questions aren't necessarily the most important thing. The questions are what they want to ask. What do the participants want to ask? But I did create a set of questions at the beginning. I wanted to know, to begin with, it's almost like a measure of how they were at the beginning and how they were at the end. So the questions were asking them about how creative they felt they were as a person, because I wanted to see if they built confidence during their journey in the creative process. It was about their experience of menopause. Were they on HRT? Were they menopausal? So those kind of basic questions to find out about their menopause, and then finding out at the end that some of the women, and if you watch the video, you'll get more understanding of this. So at the end, some of the women hadn't been to see their GPs, so they were able to personally advocate for themselves. So the questionnaire at the end showed that they had gone from maybe not really being that aware of menopause, but feeling not great, feeling unwell, to going to their GPs and advocating to get some care for menopause. But with participatory research, the important thing is that we're developing the questions as we go through. It's not about my questions per se, even though we did have a research question overarching everything. It was to see what the people within the group wanted to find out.
Thank you. Anyone else has a question, please raise your hand or post in the chat. But while we wait for that, I'm going to ask another one, if you don't mind, which is the way you describe the method you've used. Obviously, it's led to really important outcomes, but it strikes me that it's really difficult, not difficult work, but it takes some expertise and working collaborative in those ways. So in in one sense, the collaborative quilt making, but also the way in which you have the kind of rapport with your participants. So is there any advice you would give to researchers about how to go about that that way of working with your participants as a collaborative endeavor?
Well, I would say it was really useful being an insider, so having my own lived experience, because right from the start, we had that connection that people knew that I had some understanding of what they had experienced, and we could share that. I mean, that was an instant connection. The next research that I'm going on to do with the people in recovery from alcohol addiction, I don't have lived experience of, so that's going to be a different set of skills to collaborate with them and work with them. The whole process method, though, I think will build on those connections that I will be able to develop with them. So starting by taking portraits, is that time you spend with someone, 2 to 3 hours while you're taking their photograph. That's a long time to be able to bond, to choose images together. They're kind of being quite vulnerable by exposing themselves to the camera. It will be different. I won't be able to share my experiences with them while I'm taking those photos. So for me, it will be a very different insider-outsider approach. And also making it such a long form project, So it's about spending time with them. We did 8 workshops where we met the women for 3 hours each week, with the capability of extending that if we needed to. 8 workshops was enough time, and actually everybody was quite sad when it had finished because everyone had formed those connections. So yeah, I would say spending time with the people you're researching. A questionnaire isn't enough. You're not going to get real rich, in-depth information through a questionnaire.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments, Pauline?
From me,
No, sorry, for you, but no, from you is fine as well. I think that as you were able to show the film, the link is there for everybody to watch. Then obviously have a little bit more time. But yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I would encourage everyone to watch that film, because
Yeah.
the film, we had funding for somebody to come and create this film, and the premise was that we weren't going to show any faces in the film, and it wasn't because of the stigma of menopause or people not wanting to show their faces. We wanted it so that all women could make a connection with the women, could put themselves in their place. So it wasn't about the individual in the video, it was about menopausal women as a collective. The video is all the hands doing the creative processes, the hands stitching, painting, sewing, sticking things down, and then the conversations that were had. So we recorded most, but not all of the workshops. And then we had to sift through loads and loads of conversations to find, which ones encapsulated, the sort of the feel of the 8 weeks, and also answered some of those questions that we, as a participatory group of researchers, were asking. So you'll see within the video, it's 15 minutes long. It has 3 sections, one where the women talk about their experiences of menopause. The next section is where they talk about their experiences of care. So they talk about doctors' visits and things that they've experienced. And some of them are good. There is a story of a good experience with a female doctor. And then at the end, they talk about the creative process, how that's helped them to able to open up and talk about their experiences. And also, finally, you hear some stories about how the whole of the research has enabled these women to advocate for themselves and for other people. And so it's a really lovely 15 minutes, which shows that I feel that the research was successful.
Perfect, thank you. I've dropped that link in again, so if everyone can click on that link and watch the video, then we'll have the whole kind of picture from today's talk. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Again, you know, we do appreciate you giving your time to share your work. It's really important work.
Thank you.
So, you know, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you everybody for joining us. I'm going
Thank
to
you
stop
everyone
the
for coming.
recording. As always,